In a small Louisiana town, the vote became a target. The ballot box opened, and so did the bloodshed. A teacher beaten, a newspaper destroyed, a wave of violence that silenced a people's voice. We begin where democracy turned deadly. Before we begin, like and subscribe to help preserve these stories of courage. Spark in St. Landry, the vote and the threat. In 1868, in St. Landry Parish, Louisiana, the air crackled with possibility and fear. Just months earlier, a new constitution enfranchised black men, and freed people stood ready to cast ballots, claim offices, reshape their lives. The town of Opelousas stirred with change. Republican meetings, freedmen's schools, presses printing voices of the newly empowered. But behind the promise stalked a darker vision, that freedom might be rolled back, and swiftly. Local white supremacist groups sensed the shifting tide. They saw voters, offices, power slipping from their grasp. Tensions mounted. A white journalist and teacher, Emerson Bentley, edited a black-oriented Republican newspaper, taught black children, stirred resentment. On September 28th, while in his classroom, Bentley was confronted, beaten publicly. Rumors spread he had been killed. Fear jolted the community. Some armed themselves for protection. Others fled. That beating was more than personal. It was a signal. The exercise of political rights would have a cost. The schoolhouse door bore threats. The newspaper office was marked. The parish stood at a crossroad, one path toward justice, the other toward suppression. And the push came, not with ballots, but with bullets and mob. As day hardened into night, the spark ignited. White mobs mobilized under the cover of law and custom. Armed men rounded up black citizens. Schools, newspapers, freedom's instruments, they became targets. This scene ends in a roar of violence, swelling beyond a beating to full-scale terror. Freedom's pulse, voting and rising hopes. In the spring of 1868, Louisiana's newly ratified Constitution opened the door to change. Black men, once enslaved, stepped into polling places for the first time. In St. Landry Parish, in and around the town of Opelousas, Republican meetings hummed with possibility. Freedmen's schools opened. Newspapers printed promises of equality. Voting booths glowed with the dawn of democracy. But that very hope stirred fear. White conservatives saw the shifting power and recognized the stakes. If black voters and Republicans held sway, local government and land, offices and justice would slip from old control. The battleground shifted from railroads and policy to ballots and bodies. A small teacher and newspaper editor named Emerson Bentley arrived to teach black children and print a Republican paper. His presence was bold, his influence alarming to those resisting change. On September 13, a Republican march was planned. White supremacist groups monitored. Tensions spiked. One misfired rifle, a restless crowd, and calls for armed protection. These were the warning signs. The seeds of violence had been sown. And when the class of Bentley was disrupted by threats, when the schoolhouse door displayed a coffin, a skull and dagger, E.B. beware, KKK, the warning turned into action. The promise of freedom collided with the tools of intimidation. The stakes were high. The November presidential election loomed. The new electorate, the enfranchised, threatened the old order. And so the storm gathered. We move next into the outbreak of violence, the massacre that silenced votes and shattered hopes.
Ignition, the attack on Bentley, and the unraveling peace.
On the morning of September 28, 1868, the classroom of Emerson Bentley became the flashpoint. The teacher had already received threats to his house, to his paper. He found that warning on his door. And then he faced violence in front of children. 3 white supremacists entered and struck him with canes. His students fled in terror. Rumors spread that he had been killed. That beating triggered deep fear in the black community. Some gathered in small armed bands for protection. The schoolhouse and newspaper of the Republicans were symbols of change, and now symbols under attack. A confrontation near the plantation of a black man, Hilaire Payette, erupted in gunfire when deputized white men attempted to disarm black organizers. 1 man died. Others were jailed. Within days, the aggression escalated. Mobs formed, armed and furious. They stormed churches, schools, homes. They destroyed presses. They chased black citizens into swamps. The mood changed from politics to terror. Safe ground disappeared. The black electorate that had surged so boldly now shrank under fear. In St. Landry Parish, the message was clear: vote or die. And soon, the killing began. In our next scene, the massacre spreads. The violence becomes mass. The ballots vanish. The legacy of terror takes root.
Blood over ballots, the massacre unfolds.
Beginning that fall, waves of violence broke across the countryside of St. Landry Parish. Between September 28th and early October, white armed mobs hunted black citizens. Estimates of the dead range from 150 to over 200. Homes burned, churches destroyed, newspapers silenced. The Republican vote evaporated. In the 1868 presidential election, the parish recorded 0 Republican ballots. The mass violence did not occur in a vacuum. It was calculated. Groups like the local chapter of the Knights of the White Camellia organized and deputized. They hunted, captured, killed. One day's tally included 27 black men captured and lynched the next morning. Survivors scattered into swamps and exile. The image of democracy, black citizens voting for the first time, was drowned in blood. For the white supremacists, the goal was achieved. The black electorate slammed shut. The prior months of voter education, organizing, Republican ascendancy, they were all reversed. The parish reverted to white control. Families who had planned to vote, to hold offices, to rebuild, they were murdered or displaced. The promise of Reconstruction became a lie. As the survivors counted the cost, the rest of the nation largely looked away. The massacre fell out of national memory, but its silence mattered. Up next, we explore how the massacre marked the end of local black political power and ushered in decades of suppression.
Silencing the people. The aftermath of defeat.
In the months following the massacre, the political landscape in St. Landry Parish was transformed. The Republican Party collapsed locally. Black voters were terrorized into silence. No votes for Ulysses S. Grant were recorded in the parish in 1868. A once rising movement vanished. The gains of Reconstruction, schools, newspapers, local offices, were all under siege. White political bosses reasserted control. Freedmen's education and black civic leadership receded. The memory of intimidation spread. If you vote Republican, you will be killed within 24 hours, local election officials warned. Churches and schools closed or were relocated. The parish entered decades of de facto disenfranchisement. Across the South, similar patterns followed. Violence, terror, and political manipulation became key tools of white supremacist power. The massacre in Opelousas was a vivid, bitter precedent. The backlash against enfranchisement had begun, and it would last for nearly a century. In the next scene, we examine the national significance of this terror, how one parish's tragedy echoed across the Reconstruction era and helped shape voter suppression for generations.
Legacy of terror, from Reconstruction to Jim Crow.
The massacre's legacy did not end with bullets. It paved the way for systemic disenfranchisement. Paramilitary violence, poll taxes, literacy tests, all became tools of white supremacy. The story of St. Landry Parish became a microcosm of the South, the promise of democracy snuffed out by terror and policy. In national memory, the event was hardly acknowledged. Schools seldom taught it. Descendants carried the trauma quietly. Meanwhile, the black vote remained suppressed for decades, until the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. The Opelousas Massacre remains one of the deadliest examples of African American voter suppression in U.S. history. Yet the lesson endures. Access to the ballot can be met with bullets. Voices can be silenced not only by laws, but by fear. And the echoes of 1868 persist in modern debates over voter access, intimidation, and rights. Next, we bring the thread into the present, what this history means for us today, how memory, education, and justice intersect.
Remembering, reconciling, resisting.
Today, the town of Opelousas, Louisiana, and St. Landry Parish stand as silent keepers of history. Memorials exist. Descendants gather for vigils. The massacre's shadow stretches into the present. The fight for voting rights continues. What does this mean for us now? It means that the right to vote is not just about ballots. It's about safety, dignity, justice. It means that to understand the present, we must wrestle with the past. In remembering 1868, we confront both our breakthroughs and our betrayals. We live in a country that still grapples with voter suppression in many forms, legal, logistical, cultural. The massacre in Opelousas was a catastrophic interception of democracy, but its memory demands action. It invites us to protect every vote. It challenges us to build institutions that safeguard, not silence. As the cameras fade on St. Landry Parish's fields and timbered bayous, we leave with this. The ballot in hand is powerful, but only if the hand is free. Remember, reconcile, resist. The work continues. Every story reminds us who we are. Like and subscribe, and help us tell the next one.